The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. At our editorial meeting this morning, a number of us were just discussing at length the very sad and tragic events we've seen transpire in recent days in Fallujah, Iraq, and soon to be Afghanistan. Not that any of this surprises us by any means, but still to see just how fast America is falling. We've talked about this, and we've told you about this for many, many years, but even for us to see it happen, it's stunning in many ways. I know we've talked even this week about Fallujah a fair bit, but I just want to go through some of these events again, just so that we all understand just how significant these events are that are playing out before our eyes. These are devastating blows to America's might and prestige around the world. The fact that we've evacuated Iraq and in just a matter of months, really, a year or two, we've seen terrorists rush in to fill that power vacuum. I'm going to go through a few verses here in Leviticus 26. We've highlighted a couple of these this very week on the Trumpet Daily. But just look back. I'm going to try to give you some context today just on what's happened since 9/11 and some of the things that we were telling you way back in November and December of 2001, just a month or two after the attack on 9/11. And again, when you step back and look at all that's transpired over the past 12 or 13 years, the pace of prophetic events, it's as if we've just shifted right into the fast lane since that attack on September 11th in 2001. This is Leviticus 26 and verse 14. It says, "But if you will not hearken unto me and will not do all these commandments, and if you shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that you will not do all my commandments, but that you break my covenant," it says, "I will do this unto you. I will even appoint over you terror." God says He'll appoint over you terrorism, in other words. That's a curse coming from God. Now, few people can really wrap their minds around a God who will actually send curses. He certainly is a God of great benevolence and generosity who will bless those who strive to obey Him and to follow Him. But God will also allow curses to come upon us if we don't obey, if we disobey His commands, if we drift far from Him. Verse 17, "And I will set my face against you," God says, "and you shall be slain before your enemies. They that hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when none pursues you. And if you will not yet for all this hearken unto me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins." Now this chapter is known as the Blessings and Cursings chapter. You can read Deuteronomy 28 as a companion passage that just adds actually a little more detail. But Mr. Armstrong, Herbert W. Armstrong, goes through this passage at length in the United States and Britain in Prophecy. It's important that you get this book and study it so that you know where we are in prophecy. Let me just read to you a quote from this book where he describes what's happening today based upon Leviticus 26. Based upon this chapter. He says, "But after God had withheld the birthright 2,520 years, and then, when our peoples deserved nothing from God, He suddenly bestowed on us national blessings, unparalleled in history. The unconditional promise to Abraham was kept." So our peoples came upon all of this wealth. He's talking about the United States and Britain primarily. We just came upon all of this wealth and this prosperity and this power going back 2 centuries or so because of promises God made to Abraham. And the point that he makes there is that as soon as God fulfilled His promise, then He was under no obligation to continue with those many blessings. From that point forward, it was on us to hold on to them He explains, no longer is God obligated by his promise to continue our undeserving peoples in world prestige, wealth, and greatness. He says, once we had been given such unrivaled position, it was up to us whether we should keep it. Now, what's happened in the last few decades, Britain first, of course, and then now through to the United States, we've squandered these many blessings. Going back to the era of the Great War and World War II, I mean, even though Britain and the United States came out victorious, look at how the cost, the great cost, it devastated Britain. I mean, they, before that time, were just ridiculously wealthy, and that empire had spread over all the earth. The sun had never set on the great British Empire, but two world wars dramatically changed their course in history as they came out of those two great wars, really in quite a lot of debt, having lost a lot of their wealth and really unable to finance that great empire. But what made it a relatively smooth transition from Britain as this great world empire to settling into, you know, what we see in Britain today is the fact that the United States was ascending to its great power as the single greatest nation in the history of this earth. The U.S., after that Second World War, stepped forward, and it really made for one of the smoothest transfers of global dominance in history because of the close relationship between these two biblical brothers, really. But now, as we've been telling you here recently, what happens once we enter into the post-American world? What comes next? Who fills that power vacuum? Well, if you look at what's happening in Fallujah, it's like we're being given a little preview of what happens once America is pushed aside. Once America leaves, once America is gone, what will fill the power vacuum? Well, in Fallujah, it's the radical Islamists that have come flooding back into that nation. One little small preview, as I say, verse 19 here in Leviticus. And I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass. So curses set in with weather upsets. And along with that, as he says there, I'll break the pride of your power. Now let me take you back to, I should have brought that old issue that we had that came out right after 9/11. Pictures of the Twin Towers right there on the cover of the Trumpet. What did we tell you back then? Within weeks after the attack? This is from November 2001. Does America have the will to see it through? Now keep in mind, this was when there was a great show of strength. As America was mobilizing its troops, sending them off to Afghanistan, vowing to hunt down those terrorists, wherever they might be on this earth. And we were saying, does America have the will to see it through? What happens when the war spreads from Afghanistan to other less isolated governments, when world opinion begins to turn on the U.S.? That's what we were asking then. What happens after it simmers down a little bit, after the tide of world opinion begins to shift? Early on, of course, it was a fairly impressive show of strength. President Bush, the president at the time, this was in early 2000, January 2002, sorry, during the State of the Union address, he identified Iran as one of three nations in this axis of evil, as he called it. But as we pointed out at the time, I mean, it's one thing to label Iran that, which of course we wouldn't even do that today, but he labeled it as part of this axis. But basically that was the head of the terrorist snake, and it wasn't dealt with. It hasn't been to this very day. He told Congress, President Bush did at the time, that this war would not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated. It will continue until we defeat our enemies. Strong words, those. Strong words. And at the time we said, while the U.S. wants to eliminate terrorism and is becoming much more aggressive in trying to do so, its efforts will fall short. It frankly does not have the necessary will to tackle the enormity of the problem. We were telling you the truth back then. That's a pretty impressive forecast, if you don't mind me saying. I mean, that was based on Leviticus 26. That's how we knew, of course. It's not that we knew it. God told us this. And we were trying to help you see that back in 2001, back in 2002. Later on in that same piece, we wrote, as we now examine the facts emerging from this war, now keep in mind, this was written just a few weeks after the strike at 9/11. As we now examine the facts emerging from this war, we can see unequivocally that the terrorist snake will survive America's aggression, head intact and stronger than ever. The head of the snake, the terrorist snake, the entire snake, it will survive America's wrath, and it'll come through this stronger than ever, stronger than ever. This is from Melanie Phillips, a piece she posted on January 7th. She writes, the inevitable result of Obama's decision to pull all troops out of Iraq has been to create a power vacuum into which has stepped al-Qaeda. Its operatives have surged into Anbar province, where so many American and coalition soldiers gave their lives in an attempt to secure the peace. She says, cue much wailing and gnashing of teeth and panicky promises by the U.S. to send support, quote unquote, whatever that might be in the absence of troops. The cause of the panic, she asked, that all those American and other coalition soldiers who died in Iraq will be soon seen to have died in vain, as America's scuttling away from the battlefield turns fragile victory into baleful defeat, and Iraq stares into the abyss of civil war. That's the reality on the ground. Today, in the absence of America's presence, it's returned to a chaotic state, making it undoubtedly more dangerous today than it even was before 9/11. Now, in 2001, we said that there will soon come a point when the U.S. won't even be a factor in this war. Now, that's where we are today. We're not even there. Now, I told you earlier this week we're going to send some missiles and some drones and that to basically help Iran maintain control of the nation. Iran's not going to give it up. This resistance in the Anbar province, it's not going to kick Iran out. They've got it. We handed it to them on a platter. They're the ones that benefited most from America's invasion in 2003. And then when we left in 2011, we told you we're basically handing it over to Iran. And whether there's a civil war or not, Iran's going to maintain control. Notice what we wrote in June 2003. This was right at the start of America's invasion. We said, now that Iraq has been taken out of the picture, Iran is even closer to becoming the reigning king of the Middle East. It may seem shocking. Notice this. This is us writing in 2003. It may seem shocking given the U.S. presence in the region right now, because we had such a strong presence. Tens of thousands of troops in Afghanistan, Iraq. It may seem shocking given the U.S. presence in the region right now, but prophecy indicates that in pursuit of its goal, Iran will probably take over Iraq. At least it will have a heavy influence over the Iraqi people. And that's happened. That's why the Sunnis are rising up in the Anbar province, because they know Iran has that heavy presence in its alliance there with the Iraqi government. They know. And as I said yesterday, really the astonishing twist and turn here is that America is now helping Iran maintain control of its neighbor. Verse 20, it says, "And your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits." Strength spent in vain. I've read that a couple of times to you this week. And now as we step back and look at the entire war in context, what does the United States actually have to show for it? Thousands of casualties, of course. Trillions of dollars spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what do we have to show for it? That's what you call strength spent in vain. I think I've read at least 5 articles this week where commentators are talking about the deaths of soldiers being in vain. The U.S. spending money in vain. They're just echoing, without even realizing it, what it says in Leviticus 26:20. Our strength is spent in vain. And now we're going to be facing the same scenario as it plays out in Afghanistan after this year is up. Once we evacuate that area, Melanie Phillips says a horribly similar debacle is about to take place in Afghanistan, where the precipitate decision to withdraw coalition troops on top of a series of serious strategic errors in fighting the war there will soon be seen to have delivered Afghanistan straight back to the Taliban. The outcome will be that these two regions, over which the West rightly went to war because they were viewed as a threat to be neutralized, will return once more to being a threat, if not an even more dangerous one than before. It's going to turn out to be worse than even before. Look at all the, Fallujah in Iraq, of course, is in the news this week. And aside from sending a few, armaments to supposedly help the situation, you have our leaders stepping forward, and John McCain said just today, I believe, that, well, there's really nothing much we can do. Secretary of State John Kerry said, well, that's the Iraqis' fight. That's not a very strong showing coming from the United States, which worked so hard and gave up so much money and so many lives to secure the peace. It never really was totally peaceful, but it certainly was better than it is today. But just look at the cost. I'm talking money. I mentioned how Britain, coming through those 2 great wars, came out of it just unable to sustain the cost of the empire because of the debts accumulated. The U.S. debt was at $5.7 trillion right before 9/11. And so 12 years in, now there have been a lot of other things that have happened too. It's not just the war cost, it's the crazy, excessive spending that goes on as well. But here we are now at the early stages of 2014, the national debt well over 17 trillion, and all of the additional debts that we've promised to future generations, tens of trillions. Verse 21 says, "And if you walk contrary to me, and will not hearken unto me, I will bring 7 times more plagues upon you according to your sins." God's talking about it just intensifying until we learn the lesson, until we turn to Him, until we accept the fact that He's the one that gave us the blessings in the first place, and that we've squandered them away because of our sins, our many, many sins. Back to Melanie Phillips' article. She says the third element in this unholy trinity of foreign policy catastrophes in the Muslim world was the capitulation to Iran at Geneva, where the U.S., U.K., and EU agreed implicitly to allow Iran to continue to enrich uranium, as a result of which, even absent a final deal, the prospect of sanctions relief has caused Iran's economy to boom. She says, so relaxed has Iran now become indeed that a senior Iranian lawmaker has bragged that the country's uranium enrichment program could allow it to build a nuclear weapon in 2 weeks in order to put down Israel, he says. We can finally put Israel down in a matter of weeks, he boasted. That, as we said, is the head of the snake that survived that initial, lashing out back in 2001 by the United States with its head intact, and now stronger than ever, just as we told you, stronger than ever. Melanie Phillips says, even the eye-popping fact that the terrorist and genocidal Iranian regime has now become America's new best friend still doesn't lessen the astonishment at U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's bizarre suggestion that Iran might play a role in the Syrian peace talks, which, since Iran is Assad's patron and has fomented chaos and violence, not just in Syria, but in the region, is, as has been said, tantamount to calling on an arsonist to put out a fire. We've empowered the king of the South. We've empowered them because of all of these curses that we've brought upon ourselves. And now we're leaving the region. And what will happen in our absence? Well, Fallujah, as I said, gives us just a tiny preview of the kind of chaos that's going to ensue. Verse 25 says, "And I will bring a sword upon you that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. And when you are gathered together within your cities, I will send the pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy." God's talking about it intensifying so much that it's going to lead to world war and eventually even our own captivity. Now look, this isn't just the most hopeful message. There is a hopeful conclusion to this, and you know that if you've followed us for very long. But in the short run, it's going to get worse. And if you scoff at that, I just want to refer you back to what we said after the 9/11 attack. And you see if everything we didn't say in those early issues of the trumpet back then, you see yourself if it hasn't come to pass. It's exactly as we said it would. It's happening exactly like we said it would. And in the bigger picture, Mr. Armstrong described what the United States is experiencing right now and what it will soon experience in the years ahead. In this wonderful book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, 6 million of these went out to people all over the world during the 20th century. 6 million of these books. Many, many millions of people have read this message. Very few, though, very few, have really turned to God because of this warning message that God is sending out in love toward this dying world. He writes in this book, U.S. and Britain, "Do you think so great a fall could not come to so great powers as Britain and America? Do you say, it can't happen here? Do you think the great God who was able to give them such unprecedented world leadership and power and wealth is not able to take it away from them and throw them like their ancient forefathers back into slavery? You think it's impossible? You think it could never happen again? You think, well, we're America, we've got these vast oceans separating us from other continents. Surely they'll love us if we just leave them alone, if we just evacuate." He says, you need to open your eyes to the fact that Britain's sun already has set. You need to wake up to the fact that the United States, even still possessing unmatched power, is afraid, fears to use it. Just as God said, I will break the pride of your power. That's what we heard this week. Well, what can we do about Fallujah? John McCain, there's not a lot we can do. Secretary Kerry, what did he say? That's a fight that belongs to the Iraqis. Going back to this quote where he says, I will break the pride of your power, that the United States has stopped winning wars, that America was unable with all its vast power to conquer little North Vietnam. It's a little dated, this material. Mr. Armstrong died, of course, in 1986. The last version of this was put out in, I guess, 1981, maybe 1980. What would he be saying today, looking at the way things turned out in Iraq and how they'll soon turn out in Afghanistan? We've put this whole special issue together. He was right. This is really highlighting many of the prophecies Mr. Armstrong proclaimed from 1934 right through to 1986. Look at this article right in the middle of the magazine. America has won its last war Mr. Armstrong talked about that during the days of Vietnam and the Korean War and so on. I mean, since that time, can you think of one conflict where it's really worked out well for America? You can't. You can't. He says the United States is fast riding to the greatest fall that ever befell any nation. The handwriting, he says, the handwriting is on the wall. We'll send you this special issue. It's not a trumpet, I guess it's more of a booklet. But make sure you go to thetrumpet.com. And if you want to read it online, you can read it online there. But get your hard copy of this special edition. We're about to update it and print it again here in April or May. But go ahead and get your copy, your hard copy if you like. We'll send it out to you free of charge. And if you aren't one of the 6 million who have this book, you need it. You need this book today because it explains why we are where we are. It explains what's happening in the world. That's how that the Trumpet magazine can know. That's how it can be so accurate like it was back in November and December of 2001. So make sure you order this free literature. There's no cost to you. It comes without cost or obligation. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.